Well, I'm just here thinking about the Constitution of the United States, and I looked at question 175 of the Catechism on the Constitution, Arthur J. Stansbury's Catechism, from the year 1828, same year that Webster published his famous Dictionary of American English, where he gave the words. His purpose was to give the English words the meanings of those English words that the Bible gives those words. Specifically, the King James Bible. He did his own translation to go with that Bible, or go with that dictionary. Isn't it odd that nobody mentions that? Why is it nobody mentions he translated a Bible from the original tongues to go with the dictionary? But they don't. And he called that his greatest work, his translation of the Bible. But he did make the point when he translated the Bible, thank you very much there, Sugar. He did make the point when he translated the Bible that he didn't want to alter what was in the King James entirely, but he did want to clean it up and get some of the older words out of it. And he was right, of course. The English tongue had taken a massive shift between the years 1350 and about 1350 up and just before, about 1600, then the King James Bible came along. Well, about 1550, about 200 years there, the English tongue shifted in such a massive way that you can't recognize what was said before. And no linguist has ever figured out why. Well, he knew that, and he wanted to get a translation out. And he did that. Well, of course, Webster was a hardcore Calvinist, like his forebears that came to America. He was a hardcore Calvinist, which means he was a biblicist. He understood the Bible. He accepted what it said at face value. He was intimately familiar with its original tongues, and he came to those conclusions. And he decided, though, he was a firebrand. Most people didn't want to get too close to him because he wasn't in politics. He wasn't hampered in what he said. Did you ever watch, or of course you did, watch DJ Trump when he was running for president? He campaigned hard, admirable. He was up from dawn till way after dark and talking, never stopped talking. His voice began to weaken as you watched over the months. Never stopped talking. Do you remember what most of his talk amounted to? I do. He didn't have to listen very long. Most of what he said in his speeches was in admiration of other people. And he would say it, he'd pick one guy out or one group, and he'd say it over and over and over in different words. What a wonderful guy. What a patriot. He had all the words. He'd practiced them, said them so many times. Well, why? Well, that's what politics is. Admiring one another. That's what politics is. That's what you do in politics. You stand up to make a speech. You never forget to admire everybody in the room. If you don't do that, you're not going to get into office. You got to make it look like everybody's more important than you. And maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't, but that's what you got to do. And nobody's in office that doesn't do that, by the way. Most of them are liars, not all of them. Many of them sincere. Not Daniel, that's a different Webster. Noah Webster wasn't that way. He wasn't in politics. He said what he believed to be true, and he believed fundamentally, put it this way, he was right-headed, he was biblical. He said it. And people didn't want to get close to him that had a lot of power, politicians, because you can't afford when you're in politics for people to know what you're going to do next and what you think. You get thrown out of office. Politics is war. You don't let the other side know what you're thinking. And if you say it to your side, the other side will hear about it. They'll find out what you're really thinking. When I was in politics, I ran for Congress hard for a long time. I never mentioned once sodomites, lesbians. Never talked about it. I didn't talk about abortion unless it was point blank asked to me, and I give a straight answer. The straight answer for abortion, if you're running for U.S. Congress, is it has nothing to do. The federal government, the general government in Washington, D.C., has no jurisdiction to say anything about it one way or the other, because they don't have any power to do anything about it one way or the other, to pass laws for or against. It's not within the jurisdiction of the general government in Washington, D.C. to pass any laws concerning abortion. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court said in that last decision where they finally overturned Roe v. Wade. They said, why are we doing this? We have no jurisdiction to even take a case like that. Why? It's not a constitutional question. It doesn't arise under the Constitution of the United States. The federal courts are courts of very narrow, very limited jurisdiction. If it isn't something the Constitution of the United States expressly says, the federal courts, that includes the Supreme Court of the United States, has no jurisdiction. That's what abortion is, and that's what they said. This is a matter of the police power of the states. This has to do with health, education, and welfare. The federal government has no jurisdiction in respecting health. Think about that. COVID, they have no jurisdiction. Education, think about that. The Department of Education, what did DJ Trump want to do? Get rid of it. Why? Our Constitution gives the general government in Washington, D.C. no jurisdiction to say squat about education and welfare. What jurisdiction does the general government in Washington, D.C. have to issue food stamps and welfare? What jurisdiction? None. And never happened until the communists got a control of the government under Roosevelt. Remember, he was buddies with Uncle Joe. He called him Uncle Joe Stalin. Well, they were buddies, see. Well, Noah Webster, the dictionary man, he just spoke straight, like a farmer would speak, like a truck driver. But he was an educated feller, but he wasn't a plum green horn. That's Noah Webster. But what Noah understood, though, too, to bring it back, he was a graduate of an Ivy League school. And his father mortgaged the family farm to send him. And he couldn't pay. And the family lost the farm. Did you ever wonder why Noah Webster did what he did? And by the way, when you read about him, you discover he was driven. Why was he driven? Because he knew his family had given up everything for him to do what he's doing. He felt a compulsion. And so that's why he spent his life working so hard, translating the Bible into English, trying to establish an American tongue. He was the educator of America. Before McGuffey superseded Webster's readers, grades 1 through 8. He knew that's where the power was, education. And he published those readers. And that controlled a whole generation of thought. By the time we get to the late 1800s, men's minds had been bathed, Americans' men's minds had been bathed in biblical truth because of men like Noah Webster, and then McGuffey came along. And Noah did a good job. He worked hard. Who gives him credit? He wouldn't want it anyway, and he knows he's not the one that did it. And God compelled him by circumstances. He was a Calvinist. He knew that everything happened for the good of God's people. Even the bad stuff that happens is for the good of God's people. And he worked thinking that, with that mindset. And the Spirit of God impelled him to do what he did. But as I'd said, he wasn't particularly liked. And as he got older, he was liked less. Didn't bother him. To want to be liked by men is evil, according to the Bible. That's the fear of man. The fear of man. It is the fear of the Lord. The fear of not being liked by him that drives men to do heroic, intrepid things. Well, I was running for office. Congress, I'd mentioned that, and I went to my first interview with public broadcasting, public broadcast, the system that Trump's trying to defund, taxpayer-supported, powerful. And then all the other stations were there. There weren't any stations in, get this, were there any television stations in my congressional district? At that time, no. So I had to go outside the district, around the periphery, and there was one in up north, and then Decatur, Terre Haute, Paducah, St. Louis. They were all around, see? And they could broadcast into the district. Well, anyway, I went to this, and the PBS, the public, is that what it's called? It's the taxpayer-supported one, whatever it is. Public radio, public television. And the first question out of the box that the interviewer asked me on television was, well, don't you think it's kind of unusual that a man like you that likes the Bible so much would be interested in politics and be running for office? We've never had that happen before. What makes you think that you should be doing this? I didn't expect him to ask that. So I was getting my baptism of how ugly it can get, and it gets a lot uglier than that. And I said, well, it just popped into my head. The framer of the Constitution of the United States, James Madison, graduated from Princeton, took a 4-year course, graduated in 3 years. And the reason he went to Princeton was he wanted to be a clergyman. His favorite subject was Old Testament Hebrew. He ruined his health by pushing himself so hard, emotionally and physically, and he was a small man. James Madison was just little. He became president, and a brave man. What a guy. He's so brave that when the American commanding officer of the troops that were resisting the British as they were invading Washington, D.C., when he got rabid and ran, he ran in the face of the enemy. James Madison ran out of the White House, ran up to the troops, told somebody to give him a sword, got out in front of the troops and led a charge. That really happened in his civilian clothes. Well, he's commander-in-chief. He said, if nobody else is going to do it, I'm in charge. It's my job. Well, that's James Madison. What a guy. Dolly, his wife, she was in that White House trying to get all the pictures off the walls and get the china out because it looked like the British were going to burn the White House, which they did. Burned it, gutted it, blackened it all on the inside. Still standing, of course. We remodeled it later. Madison, he ruined his health. He ruined it. Pushing himself. And he was the favorite student of the leader of the Scottish Enlightenment, who had been called to Princeton to be the president, John Witherspoon, called the educator of America's founders, and others that came along later. An inerrantist. He believed the Bible didn't have any errors in it. Go read about him, John Witherspoon. James Madison was his protege. Well, I answered a question like that, and I could tell it was a paradigm shift for him. Why do I tell you that story? Because the truth is, our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the God of this book, these 66 writings we call the Bible, our God, the Christian God, is the God of government. He's the God of everything. He's the God of war, the God of war, the God of government, the God of the ocean and the wind and the waves and all of creation. He's not the God of this or that, like in all the paganism, all the Babylonianism. You got saints for this and saints for that. Those are gods. The God of this, the God of that. That's not Christianity. Christianity is God, the maker of heaven and earth and all that in them is. He's the God of government. He's the God, the creator of all things, seen and unseen, according to what he says. Seen and unseen. Truth, if it's unseen. Whatever it is. And government is God's business. That's the way I like to put it. Government is God's business. I never mentioned homosexuality when I was running for office. None of the business of the general government. But here's what I wanted to get at. I never mentioned it. But boy, did they attack me. I mean, they came out in full force. Those people that practice those things. Why? Well, the evil spirit in them recognized the spirit that was in me. That's why. And it's the spirit of Jezebel versus the spirit of Elijah is one way to put it. There are other ways to put it. But it's a theme throughout the whole Bible. Which spirit do you have? The spirit of Elijah, the spirit of God, or the spirit of Jezebel, the old whore? Old, hard Babylonian whore. If you have that spirit, you're part of the problem. And you may have it and don't even know it. It controls a lot of people, men and women. Our whole country, friends, our whole world is effeminate. Who was it that said, great saying, that said, if it can't work, it won't. If it can't work, it won't. And the way things are going can't work. That is why, of course, the good news is, in this last election, people said, hey, we're tired of this. It's not working. It can't work. It won't work. When Barry Goldwater was running for president, I remember him saying, he said in his speeches, we've watched all this since the 1930s and Roosevelt. It's not working. Let's stop. That was in the early 60s. Stop all the stupidity. It doesn't work. It can't work. It won't work. It's fantasy. It's clown town. Who is this Pope? I'm not paying any attention to him, but I can't help hear people saying what he's saying. Oh, we must stop fighting each other. War has to cease. Jesus doesn't like war. Let's stop fighting. What does that mean? That means everybody agree with him and there won't be any problems. That's what that means. And don't think that isn't what that means. That's what that has always meant with those bozos. If you're stupid enough to go along with it, of course, that's just meaningless talk. Jesus never said it that way. Jesus said, if you don't have a sword, sell your coat if you have to and get one. We live in a cruel, hard world. And we can have peace and tranquility if we obey him. Obey what the record of what it says in his book. Government is God's business. Let's not forget it. The world is going haywire, of course. It's going woke. This is what the evil empire does. It takes an idea like awaken. Where'd that come from? Woke, awaken. Where'd that come from? People say that came from Leadbelly, 1938. 1938, yeah. Leadbelly. He was a very famous Negro folk singer and writer in the 1930s, an oppressed man Oh, yeah, he was oppressed, no question. He's the one that wrote, "May the midnight special shine a light on me. Yonder comes Miss Rosie. You know how I know? I can tell Miss Rosie by the dress that she's got on. Going to bring a little coffee. Going to bring a little tea. Going to bring a little everything, but she'll never bring the jailhouse key." He was lewd. Some people said that Leadbelly was a clothed animal, but he was an intelligent one. He was clever. A lot of his songs, but they were off color. Some wouldn't play them because they were a little bit lewd. He was an oppressed man. If you ever go to Dallas, you better walk straight. You better not stagger. You better not start a fight. The sheriff will come and get you, and he'll throw you in the can. And if you say a thing about it, you're in trouble with the man. That's Leadbelly. Well, Leadbelly, after there was an accusation of a bunch of young, back in the 1930s, young Negro boys that were hoboing. And there was a young white boy and a young white girl hoboing. And the young white girl claimed that the Negro boys got her in a boxcar and raped her. That was down south. All those boys were taken to trial for rape. This young girl was hard. She got on the witness stand. Wow, what a spectacle. I've read the transcript. They hired a Jewish lawyer, or he volunteered. You know, they didn't hire. He volunteered out of New York, come down to defend these boys. Well, as it turned out, it was clear this girl was lying. She was lying. She wanted attention, apparently. And of course, that helped start and fuel the NAACP, which was also started by Jewish people after the Springfield, Illinois riot of 1912. Springfield, Illinois riot of 1912, the NAACP was put in place by Jewish people. It wasn't put in place by people of color. The confusion. You know, you can make a lot of money off of people that are oppressed. That's what's been going on. That's what the welfare programs under Roosevelt and Johnson were all about. Poor people are gold mine. Oppressed people like Leadbelly was oppressed. Yes, he was. And all of those people of color were oppressed. Still are in many places. But using them to make money off of them while you're claiming to help them doesn't work. It makes it worse. That's the evil empire. That's the evil one himself. Dignity doesn't come by throwing money at people. Now let's take more and make us rich folk feel better to throw some money at these poor folks so they can have some housing, food. Doesn't work. It has never worked. It will never work. It is fantasy to say it will work. Make you feel better, maybe. All you're doing is giving other people's money, not yours. You want to give them money? Give them money. Don't tell the government to do it. I've read enough history to know that what I'm saying will never, there will always be the antagonist that will try to stop it and will be very powerful. But let's try to hold the line best we can with truth. And where does truth come from? It comes from truth himself. Who said, "I am truth"? Who said that? Who said, not me, I shouldn't be pointing at me. Who said, "I am truth"? John 14:6. I am, he doesn't say I'm truth, he said, "I am the truth. No man comes to the Father except to come through me." And you were wondering why they murdered him? You say that kind of stuff, somebody's going to hate you for it. Well, that's the height of, either that's the height of arrogance or that's God talking about himself. Well, government's God's business. And if it's not looked at from that point of view, things are going to get worse. Let's look at it here a little bit. 175. May any of the states, this is God's business. We're in church. We're talking about his laws, the laws of nature, our common law tradition as it applies to government. May any of the states of the United States lay a tonnage duty That is, require a sum of money to be paid to every vessel entering any of the harbors of that state? Answer, no. No. States got together and said, okay, we're going to give certain powers to the national government. We're going to use this instrument called the Constitution of the United States to do it. And one of the things we're giving to the national government is the exclusive authority to collect duties. Notice it says tonnage duty. I remember I said yesterday, if you were here, we call them taxes, we call duties sometimes. Why? Because they're not they're not the result of contract. They're the result of law. Saw a famous movie one time years ago, made back in the 1940s with Jimmy Stewart. Remember Jimmy? Some of you don't, I do, but some don't, but some of you do remember. He was a B-movie actor. Hollywood would never accept him. You know, he's one of those actors like who was it I was thinking of the other day? Jimmy Cagney. Jimmy Cagney was married for 58 years. He had the same wife. He was in Hollywood, had the same wife all the way through. Weird, right? That's the way Jimmy Stewart was. You know, he's had one wife. He didn't fit, see, with the rest. So they never gave him, well, at the beginning, they gave him a big award back in 1930-something, 38. He won an Emmy or something, and his dad set it in the hardware store window back there in a place called Indiana, Pennsylvania. But they wouldn't give him anything after that. They thought they'd lure him into their circles. It never happened. But he was more popular than the people that weren't B-movie actors. John Wayne was the same way. He never got any awards his whole life till that last movie he made, that one of the last ones, almost the last one, True Grit. Because he played the part of a drunken victim, so that was okay. They gave him an award for looking as slimy as them. See, that's the way that works. Well, Jimmy was a B-movie actor, and he was in this movie back in the 1940s, and it was about a tax collector came by this fellow's house, and this was one part of the movie, and wanted to collect taxes. He was an IRS agent. And so he said, come on in, sit down here. And then he said to him, well, you want me to pay these taxes, right? He said, all right. He said, well, what have you done for me? And we got a deal here. What have you done for me? If you've not done anything for me, I'm not going to pay you any taxes. And he said, that's not the way it works. He said, well, that's the way I think it works. Well, what was he saying? He was saying, look, this is a quid pro quo. If you haven't done anything for me, why do I owe you anything? Haven't we got a deal here? It's a deal. No, when ships come into the harbors from other countries, and they got to pay a tariff, or they got to pay a tonnage duty just to come into the harbor, that's called a duty. It's not a contract. That ship may have come in, didn't even know it was coming. It comes in, it pays on the spot. They got a man there collecting. You got to pay so we can keep this harbor open. That arises out of law, not out of contract. When you want to cross a bridge, you pay a fee. That's a tax, friends. It doesn't arise out of whether you like the bridge or like the way the bridge is free of traffic. Maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Even though you get a benefit, it's still a law. The legislature or somebody passed a law that said you got to pay that money. That's not contract. It's patriot mythology, very popular to say otherwise. May a state keep soldiers whom the state pays in time of peace, according to our Constitution of the United States. May the state of Texas form an army, a navy, keep soldiers. Let's think about Texas just as an example. Keep soldiers, have them on the payroll and pay them in times where there's no war. What's the answer? No, the Constitution forbids that. I have a friend, he's gone now, down in Texas, and he told me, Brent, did you know that Texas has a Navy? I said, no, I didn't know that. Christian fella. grew up Pentecostal Nazarene. Of course, I'd always argued that Nazarene is Pentecostal, but he didn't understand the difference. But it is. Nazarene's Pentecostal, but he was in a denomination called the Pentecostal Nazarenes. He went to college up in Oklahoma City. And then when he was a young man, he put on a knapsack. He's from Texas, and he went to Europe. And he stayed at L'Abri in Switzerland. L'Abri. And that means, Miss Francine, I think, confirmed me on this one. L'Abri means the refuge. It has that idea. A very famous place back when I was a young man. It was in the mountains in the Alps, in a little agricultural valley. And an American by the name of Francis Schaeffer, a graduate of Princeton Seminary and a Presbyterian, he was a missionary over there, and then they quit supporting him, and he formed this little refuge for people from all over, young people from all over the world to come that were, during the hippie days, try to get their heads screwed on straight. I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but he went over there, and at L'Abri, you'd work in the garden, and you'd work in milking the cows or whatever they had going there. You had to work to support the place, and people would come by, and Francis would, and his wife, what was her name? She was a peach of a gal. I met him back in 1981. Just a nice lady, very nice lady. And don't remember her name. Edith Schaeffer. Well, they would talk to the young people at night and try to explain to them why it's important to recognize the God of the Bible, why the Bible is true, that kind of thing. Well, this fellow went there, had his knapsack on, hung out there for a while, came back to the States, spent the rest of his life advocating the independence of Texas. He was good at it too. I mean, he knew his stuff, but he said, Brent, did you know Texas has a Navy? I said, no, I didn't know that. I said, where are they home? Where's their ships and all that? He said, well, it was started back before Texas was a state. It was a country back in the 1800s, and they had a couple of ships when Sam Houston was president. Remember, Sam Houston was from Tennessee, and he was a protege of President Andy Jackson and in his political machine, and then he got chasing some skirt there in Washington, D.C., ruined his political career, turned into a drunk, moved in with the Cherokee Indians in the Appalachian Mountains, and they had a name for him. I forget what it was in Cherokee, but they just called him the drunk. He was just a drunk. He was shacking up 2, 3 Cherokee girls in a teepee or something, or maybe they didn't have teepees. No, they had those little wigwams, yeah. In the eastern forest, tribes had wigwams. The Kickapoo, where I'm from, they had wigwams. Well, he was shacking up with these girls and had some illegitimate children, I think. And finally, Jackson sent a message to him and said, you know, you're ruined. You can't come back to Washington, D.C. You're fiddling around with that other famous man's wife. He's not going to put up with that. You hadn't figured that out at the time, but now you got that figured out. He said, I want you to do something for me. Well, what is it, Andy? He said, you owe me. Oh, he'd been a brave man in battle with Andy, too. The Tennessee militia fighting the Redskins down there in Alabama, the Red Sticks. Yeah. What was that fellow's name? Weatherby. Weatherford. Weatherford was the chief of those tribes confederated down there. He was, this guy Weatherford, he was 7/8 white and 1/8 Indian, but he was chief of the tribe. So he organized them and went to war against Andy Jackson. And not only was he white, he was Scotch-Irish, 7/8. So him and Jackson went to war against each other. Jackson whooped him, but then they became good friends, and Jackson ended up adopting some of the Indian children that were orphaned over that battle, but Sam Houston was wounded at that battle. He led a charge as a young man. I don't know whether he took some arrows in the leg or a rifle ball. I forget which one it was. Anyway, so Andy contacted him, said, I want you to go to Texas. Texas fighting with the Mexicans. And I want you to make sure when they get done fighting that Texas comes into the Union. That's what I want you to do. You understand politics. Get your carcass down there and get the job done. You owe me. Well, he got up out of his wigwam, said goodbye to his concubines, and hightailed it for Texas with an unofficial commission in his hand, unofficial. He led the fight of independence from Mexico, but took a while to get him in, to get Texas to come into the Union. And during that time, Texas was its own country, and they put Sam Houston as its first president. And during that time, they did have a paid army, not very big, and they had a navy. Well, he said they still got one. Well, they really didn't. They had an honorary navy, and they didn't have an army. They had an honorary army. Well, then how's a state to protect itself if it doesn't have a paid army? Constitution says it can't have one. Well, what it does have is the militia of the state that can be called out by either the sheriff of the county as the posse comitatus, the posse, the power of the county, posse, the possibility of the comitatus, the county, or the governor can call out a militiaman in defense of the state. That's true. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's why we have 4 militia clauses in our Constitution of the United States that lay all that out, how that works. But no, they're not to keep soldiers. May they keep ships in time of peace? Question 177. Answer, under our Constitution, no. Now notice it says in times of peace. That means that not in times of war. If the general government in Washington, D.C. doesn't do anything to protect the state can do a lot of things. If Texas is going to be invaded, as they were invaded under Biden, then Texas has every right to defend themselves by whatever means the governor and the legislature and the courts allow or decide they need to do. Go to war if necessary, yes. Call up the militia, see to it that they're armed. Without the militia, we don't have that, see. We need that. And I want you to take the course on the 4 militia clauses. Sheriff Darleaf and I taught a 12-week course. I believe it was 12 weeks on the 4 militia clauses, as I'm reminded was the most popular course we taught. Massive amounts of people came to take that course. And also the course we taught a couple of years ago, maybe 3, on the sheriff at common law and the power of the sheriff, the posse. You can take that course. Go to commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. 178, question 178. May one state enter into an agreement with another state? Answer, under our Constitution, no. No. Now let's think about that just a little. That'll help you remember it. We had a horrible war in this country where almost 700,000 Americans slaughtered, almost 700,000 Americans over this question. Read it again. May one state enter into an agreement with another state? What does it say? No. Is that true? That's right. No, our Constitution doesn't allow that. And almost 700,000 men, Americans slaughtered almost 700,000 Americans over that question. That war between the northern and the southern tiers of the states. And the northern states said, you can't do that. Our Constitution doesn't allow that. Now go home, quit raising armies, quit joining into agreements. You formed a confederacy. What's a confederacy? Con, Latin, con, with, together with. Really means together with. Fides, a league, a head, a central government. we agree that we're all going to submit to somehow and have a confederation under Articles of Confederation under this general government. And the United States said the Constitution doesn't allow that. Now go home, quit doing that. You're trying to go to war against us. That's exactly what they were doing. Is that constitutional? Well, what did the southern states say? They say, well, of course, that's true. The Constitution forbids that, but don't forget, we didn't do that while we were states. We left the Union. Then we did it. See, that was their argument. We left the Union. Seceded from the Union of States. The Union is dissolved. The Union is dissolved. Big headlines, Charleston, South Carolina newspaper, very famous headlines, letters this big on the front page, 1861, said, the Union dissolved, or Union dissolved, because South Carolina was the first state to leave the Union. They didn't form a confederacy while they were members of the Union, they said, which was true. They formed their confederacy. They wouldn't allow anybody to join until after they had left the Union by official vote. Well, the North said then, well, but you're not allowed to leave the Union without our permission, without the permission of the Congress of the United States. Without permission of the Congress of the United States, the national legislature. Well, why did they say that? Well, because there's no way those states got into the Union without permission from Congress. That's what the Constitution says. They got into the Union because Congress said, yes, you can come in. If Congress, their argument was this, if Congress has the power to let a state into the Union, then only Congress has the power to get them out. He who has the power to give has the power to take. That's the maxim of our common law. That was their argument back. But they couldn't agree, you see. They couldn't agree on a common external standard whereby to govern their relationship, and there's only one option left, and you don't agree. You've heard me say this before. Either, if the world's wide enough, get away from each other and leave each other alone, or you're going to have to go to blows until the other side can't fight anymore. That could mean a lot of things. It could mean disablement, economic ruin, death. That's what war is. If you can't agree on a common external standard, the Japs said, well, they bombed Pearl Harbor and said, our religion tells us, our lawgiver, that the time has come to bring all of mankind under the 9 corners of the pagoda of Shintoism. People don't talk about that. No, they don't want us to think it's a religious war. Well, it is. All war is religious war, because all war has to do with not being able to agree on a common external standard whereby to govern your relationship with another nation. Where does that common external standard come from? It comes from a lawgiver. Oh, what's a lawgiver? A God. A final arbiter of right and wrong. Well, they had a different one than us. That's okay. We can get along. Just leave each other alone pretty much. But it came to the point they said, our God's telling us to kill you if we have to. And they did. Over 2,100 about dead Americans in Pearl Harbor. And they just went like gangbusters after that and wouldn't stop. And we said, whoa, hold your horses. Our God, our lawgiver, our law says that ain't true. Our law doesn't allow you to come over here and slaughter us that way. Slaughter us, including the Filipinos. They did that to them too. And the people in Guam, and those were Americans too. American territory. And the Aussies down there, they went and they bombed Brisbane? I think it was. One of those towns down there. And then they tried to invade, and the Americans stopped them at the Battle of the Coral Sea. And we started in at the Solomon Islands down south there near Australia, and we just started working our way north, starting in Guadalcanal. And then we wiped them out. Fortunately, if we hadn't wiped them out, they'd have wiped us out. War is evil, of course. Is the Pope right? Oh, war is terrible. But when some other religion, and that's what it always comes to, Germany, same thing. We couldn't agree on a common external standard whereby to govern our relationship. What's our common external? What's our standard? As Americans, 2 volumes. And then we're going to play a song, Miss Francine, if you got one. 2 volumes. The laws of nature are common law tradition, unwritten, meant to be observed and followed. If you don't, you'll die. The way God has made creation and the laws that govern it, and the laws of nature's God are Bibles. That's our standard. Those 2 volumes, these and no others. These and no more. If you got that, you got a foundation. What was Germany's foundation? And what is the rest of the world's foundation? The laws of the city, the civil canon laws of Rome. Those are the laws coming from Babylon. They govern that code. That Justinian code governs every country in the world. They're not like us. Our vice president went to Europe not too long ago and said, why are we defending you? We're pouring our hard-earned American money into defending you. We're paying for NATO, and you don't have the values we have. Freedom of speech is not part of law on the continent of Europe. You're not part of the common, he didn't say this, but it's clear you're not part of the common law tradition. Why would we give our blood and money? And his point was, we shouldn't. You're at odds with us. We can't agree on a common external standard whereby to govern our relationship. We have Christian sensibilities in America. They don't. They're goners. They don't. It's either get away from each other and leave each other alone, or we'll have to go to blows. That will happen sooner or later. That's why Christianity has always said missionaries are important. Missionaries are important. Why? Because if you have the same lawgiver, you have fundamentally the same law. See? That's why we've gotten along so well with Canada all these decades. They're fundamentally like us, a little different, of course, but fundamentally like us. They speak English. They're Christian in their culture. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The laws of nature, their common law tradition is the same as ours, fundamentally. So we get along. We've had a great friendship with them. Didn't you ever stop to ask, why is it that our border in the north, all my life, was open? The border in the south was closed. We called them, we had terrible names, wetbacks. We didn't want them coming across. And I don't dislike the Mexicans. Frankly, I think they're very hard-working folk and intelligent, hard-working folk. That's not the point. The point is we didn't get along with them. We closed the border. We didn't want them coming over here. We just went back and forth in Canada. Why? Because they were compatible to us. We had a common fundamental culture, cultivation of a Christian tradition called our common law tradition. We didn't talk about it. We just knew it. We did it. They looked like us, fundamentally. They talked like us. They approached their problems like us with juries. I was in a case one time. I'll quit with this, Miss Francine. I was in a case one time, right locally here where I come from. And the fellow on the other side came into court and said, well, I've got a judgment from Canada. This has already been litigated. And our law under res judicata says this court has no jurisdiction to litigate it again. I was also in a case one time where I argued that, and it had to do with Canada. I said, this fellow's from Canada. He said, my man's already litigated this. And you know what the court said in both cases? They wanted proof that was true. And they said this, and this is our law in America. If due process was followed, what's due process? That's our common law tradition. Not the outcome standards, but how we go about solving our problems. How we go about fighting our fights. Do we fight fair? Does everybody have an opportunity to get his licks in if he can make them? It's adversarial. Well, we looked at the record, and the judges down here in Podunk, America said, well, that's right. They followed due process up there in in the Great White North. And so, no, we're not going to take jurisdiction over this case. It's done. We don't litigate things twice in America. That's stupid. You get one bite of the apple and move on. You can appeal, but we're not going to try the case again just because you didn't win. That's like a guy that loses a hand in poker and somebody else gets the pot, and the guy that loses the hand says, I don't think that hand should count. Well, why not? Well, my mind wasn't on the game. I wasn't paying attention. Oh, well, let's do it again. You can have all that. We'll put all this money back and we'll do it again. No, you had your chance. That's the way it works in our common law tradition. Once you've got a chance to have a fair fight, if you take the chance, great. If you don't, well, go home and do your best. Well, that's the way it is also when we look at Canadian law. We have a fundamentally common external standard whereby to solve our problem between one another.